Dean Martin never talked about the war, but when a WWII veteran collapsed during his show, what Dean did next revealed the secret he'd been hiding for 30 years about his own military service. It was December 7, 1975, exactly 34 years after Pearl Harbor, and Dean Martin was performing his usual smooth set at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. The audience of 1,200 was packed with tourists, high rollers and celebrities, all there to see the King of Cool work his magic on stage. Dean was in the middle of Ain't That a Kick in the Head when he noticed something unusual in the third row. An elderly man, probably in his late 50s, was sitting alone and seemed to be having some kind of episode. His hands were shaking violently, and he kept looking around the room as if he was searching for exits. Dean had seen this behavior before, though he'd never talked about where or why. He recognized the signs immediately. The hypervigilance, the trembling hands, the desperate need to know where all the exits were. This man was having what people didn't yet call a PTSD flashback, but which Dean knew intimately as shell shock or battle fatigue. As Dean continued singing, he watched the man's condition worsen. The veteran, and Dean was certain he was a veteran, and Dean began sweating profusely and gripping the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Then, during the instrumental break of the song, the man suddenly stood up and began stumbling toward the exit, knocking over drinks and bumping into tables. Other audience members were starting to stare and whisper, treating the man like a drunk or a troublemaker. That's when Dean Martin did something he had never done in 25 years of performing. He stopped singing mid-song. The band, confused by Dean's sudden silence, gradually stopped playing. The audience fell quiet, wondering what was happening. Dean set down his microphone and walked to the edge of the stage, his eyes fixed on the struggling veteran who was now halfway to the exit. "Sir," Dean called out, his voice carrying clearly through the silent showroom. The veteran stopped and turned around, his face flushed with embarrassment and confusion. He looked like he wanted to disappear, to get away from all the staring eyes and back to wherever he felt safe. "What's your name?" Dean asked gently. The man hesitated for a moment before answering. Robert Patterson, sir." "What branch, Robert?" Dean asked. The question surprised everyone in the audience, but Robert understood immediately. "Army, sir. 82nd Airborne, European Theater." Dean nodded slowly. "I know what you're going through, Robert. I really do." The audience was completely silent now, sensing that something extraordinary was happening, but not understanding what. Dean walked down from the stage and began moving through the tables toward Robert Patterson. As he got closer, he could see the man's symptoms more clearly. The rapid breathing, the dilated pupils, the way he kept scanning the room for threats that weren't there. "You were at D-Day, weren't you?" Dean asked quietly when he reached Robert. Robert nodded, tears starting to form in his eyes. Normandy, and the Bulge, and so many other places. Dean put his hand on Robert's shoulder. "Sit down for a minute, Robert. Just sit down and breathe with me." Dean guided Robert back to his table and sat down next to him. The entire audience watched in stunned silence as one of the world's biggest entertainers abandoned his show to care for a stranger. "Look at me, Robert," Dean said softly. "Just look at me and breathe. You're not there anymore. You're here, in Las Vegas, in 1975. You're safe." Robert was crying now, but his breathing was starting to slow down. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I don't know what happened. I was fine, and then the music got loud and the lights, they reminded me of flak bursts." Dean finished for him. "The lights reminded you of flak bursts over Europe." Robert stared at Dean in amazement. "How did you know that?" For the first time in his public career, Dean Martin was about to reveal something he had kept hidden from everyone. His fans, his friends, even his family. "Because I saw them too, Robert," Dean said quietly. "I was there." The audience was straining to hear what Dean was saying, but he was speaking only to Robert now in a voice barely above a whisper. "What outfit were you with?" Robert asked. "Army Air Forces," Dean replied. "Combat photographer. I flew in B-24 over Germany, documenting bombing missions for intelligence purposes." This was news to everyone. Dean Martin's war service had always been described in vague terms in his official biographies, Most people assumed he had spent the war stateside, maybe entertaining troops or working in defense plants. No one knew he had flown combat missions. How many missions? Robert asked, recognizing that this was the question that mattered most. 47, Dean answered. I was supposed to stop at 25, but they kept extending my tour because I was good with the cameras and they needed the documentation. Robert whistled softly. 47 missions over Germany. Jesus. How did you deal with what you saw? Dean was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with years of buried emotion. I didn't deal with it, Robert. I buried it. I created this whole persona, Dean Martin, the cool guy who doesn't have a care in the world, who drinks martinis and makes everything look easy. I built this character because the real me, the me that flew those missions and saw what I saw, was too broken to face the world. The showroom was so quiet that people in the back could hear Dean's confession. I've had nights, just like the one you're having. Dean continued. Nights when the sound of a plane overhead would send me into a panic. Nights when I'd wake up screaming about friends who didn't make it back from missions over Munich or Berlin. Robert was staring at Dean with a mixture of recognition and relief. Here was someone who understood. Someone who had been where he was. The drinking, Robert said. Do you really drink as much as they say you do? Dean shook his head. The martini glass is mostly apple juice, but I started drinking for real. After some of the bad nights, the nights when the memories wouldn't stop coming. It took me years to realize that alcohol just made everything worse. Dean looked around the showroom, at the 1,200 people hanging on his every word. I built my entire career on being the guy who never gets rattled, who never shows fear, who makes everything look effortless. But the truth is, I've been rattled since 1944. I've been afraid since my first mission over occupied Europe, and nothing about dealing with what we saw over there has ever been effortless. Robert reached out and gripped Dean's hand. Why are you telling me this? Why are you telling everyone this? Because, Dean said, his voice growing stronger, I've watched you sitting here for the last 20 minutes, and I've seen myself 30 years ago. I've seen the shame, the isolation, the feeling like you're the only one who can't just get over it and move on with your life. Dean stood up and addressed the entire audience for the first time since he'd left the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Robert Patterson. Robert jumped into Normandy on D-Day, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and helped liberate Europe from Nazi control. He's an American hero, and he's having a difficult night because sometimes the things we do for our country leave marks that never completely heal. The audience began to applaud, but Dean held up his hand. But here's what I want you to understand. Robert Patterson isn't weak for having these struggles. He's human. And if we can't create a world where our veterans feel safe enough to have difficult moments without being judged or whispered about, then we've failed them twice. Once when we sent them to war, and again when they came home. Dean turned back to Robert. You said you've been having more episodes lately. What's triggering them? I've been alone since my wife died 6 months ago, Robert admitted. She was the only one who understood. She helped me through the bad nights. Without her, you don't have to go through this alone anymore, Dean said firmly. I'm going to give you my personal phone number. When you have bad nights, you call me. It doesn't matter what time it is. It doesn't matter where I am. You call me, and I'll talk you through it. Dean pulled out a business card and wrote his private number on the back. I should have done this 30 years ago. So reached out to other guys who went through what we went through. Maybe we could have helped each other, instead of suffering in silence. Robert was crying again, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. There's something else, Dean said. I want you to come to my show tomorrow night, but this time you're not sitting in the audience. You're sitting backstage with me, as my guest, and if you have another episode, I'll be right there. The audience erupted in applause, but Dean wasn't finished. And Robert, I want you to know something else. Every time I get on stage, every time I perform, I'm fighting the same battle you're fighting. The difference is, I've learned to use the performance as a way to control my environment, to feel safe. Maybe we can find a way for you to feel safe too. Dean helped Robert to his feet and walked with him backstage, leaving the audience in the showroom. But instead of ending the show there, Dean returned to the stage 15 minutes later, with Robert beside him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dean announced, "Robert Patterson has agreed to stay for the rest of the show. He's going to sit right here at the side of the stage, and I'm going to dedicate the rest of tonight's performance to every veteran who's ever struggled with memories they can't forget." Dean picked up his microphone and began singing "The Way You Look Tonight." But his voice was different now. It was more vulnerable, more real, more human. The cool persona was still there, but underneath it was something new: authenticity. After the show, Robert Patterson and Dean Martin spent 2 hours talking backstage about the war, about survival, about the weight of carrying experiences that most people could never understand. "Why did you decide to tell everyone tonight?" Robert asked. "Because," Dean replied, "I realized that hiding who I really am wasn't protecting me anymore. It was killing me. And watching you struggle alone reminded me that there are probably thousands of guys like us who think they're the only ones who can't just get over it." Dean Martin's revelation that night changed his relationship with his audience forever. Word spread quickly through the entertainment industry and the veteran community about what had happened at the Sands. Dean began receiving letters from veterans all over the country, thanking him for speaking openly about combat trauma. Robert Patterson became a regular at Dean's Vegas shows and eventually became involved in early efforts to provide support for veterans dealing with what would later be recognized as PTSD. Dean quietly funded several veteran support programs, never seeking publicity for his contributions. The friendship between Dean and Robert lasted until Robert's death in 1987. Dean spoke at his funeral, telling the gathered mourners, "Robert Patterson saved my life by giving me permission to be human again." Dean's openness about his war experiences also changed his relationship with his family. For the first time, he was able to talk to his children about why he sometimes had bad nights, why loud noises sometimes made him tense, why he needed to know where all the exits were in every room he entered. Dad became a different person after that night. His daughter Deanna said years later, "Not completely different, but more honest. More real. He stopped pretending that nothing ever bothered him." The incident at the Sands also influenced Dean's later performances. While he maintained his smooth, cool image, there was a depth and authenticity to his work that hadn't been there before. He began including songs that dealt with more serious themes, and his connection with his audience became more genuine. Frank Sinatra, when he heard about what had happened, told Dean, "Dino, you did something braver on that stage than anything you did during the war. You let people see who you really are." Dean's willingness to break his carefully constructed image to help a fellow veteran became legendary in Las Vegas entertainment circles. Other performers began to realize that authenticity could be more powerful than perfection. The story of Dean Martin and Robert Patterson also highlighted the hidden struggles of World War II veterans, many of whom had been suffering in silence for decades. It helped pave the way for better understanding and treatment of what is now recognized as PTSD. In his later years, Dean would often say that December 7, 1975, was the most important performance of his career. Not because of the songs he sang, but because of the truth he told. "Robert Patterson taught me that the strongest thing you can do isn't to hide your pain," Dean reflected. "It's to use your pain to help someone else heal." When Dean Martin died in 1995, Robert Patterson's son found a letter among his father's effects. It was from Dean, written just days after their first meeting. "Thank you for giving me permission to stop pretending. Thank you for reminding me that being human isn't a weakness. It's the only thing that really matters." The courage Dean showed that night, the courage to stop performing and start being real, proved that sometimes the most powerful thing an entertainer can do is stop entertaining and start connecting with the humanity in all of us. If this story of courage, vulnerability, and veteran brotherhood moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the power of showing your true self. Have you ever had to choose between hiding your pain and helping someone else heal? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to check out our other videos about the real people behind the entertainment legends.